Welcome viewers to the series Exploring Careers in Data Analytics. My name is Kathy Hahn. I'm a senior at Middlebury College, and I would like to introduce this episode's guest speaker. I'm joined today by Jeb, class of 2010, Director of Data Science with Meta. Welcome and thank you for joining us today, Jeb.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Jeb, this series explores a number of different professional roles involving data analytics. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do as Director of Data Science with Meta.
Of course. My role is as the Director of Data Science here at Meta. So I can talk a little bit about what data science at Meta is and then kind of my role in particular. So within Meta, data science is the primary quantitative analytical arm of the organization. And so it's typically the types of challenges that we are helping to make the best possible products for our users and using data to make those decisions. So those decisions range from how is the product performing today? Hey, we see that the number of people using a given feature has declined. Why? Is something broken that we need to go fix, right? And those kinds of things. That would be more operational type of work where we're analyzing trends to understand what is causing a certain kind of fluctuation in a metric and what we should do about it. The next set would be kind of on setting goals. So saying, hey, what should we aspire to accomplish as an organization over the next 6, 12, or 18 months? And how might we measure our progress against those ambitions in terms of growth of a product or how reliable a service may be from a technical perspective or all those kind of things. And then the last one is how do we use data to make really important strategic decisions? And so I would bucket those into two groups. One type of strategic decision is the infrequent decisions that are very high impact in terms of how we would make them. And in that case, a human will go through and analyze, if we have a team of 10 engineers, should they work on feature A or feature B? And we understand the opportunity size and the risks related to that and all those kind of things, such that we could then help make the best possible decision about where to invest. The second type of strategic decision is a very frequent decision that needs to be made every minute, or in the case of something like Instagram, hundreds of thousands of times per second, right? And that would be something like, what content should I show you, Kathy, based on your interests and those kind of things? And typically to answer those, we'll create algorithms that help use the data that we have about what's interesting to you or to people in general, the people you follow and all that kind of such that each time we can try to make the best possible decision in terms of what content to serve you next. So that's data science kind of overall, again, in that kind of like executional, what's happening with the business and how do we understand where we need to dig in? Goal setting, what should we be focused on and why, and how do we measure our progress against that? And then strategic decision making, both in terms of like the big important resource decisions of should we invest in A or B, and then the kind of algorithmic decision making that needs to happen very frequently in order to make the best product. My role within the data science organization as a director is largely as a player coach. So I view my job as first and foremost to hire great people. I am fortunate to support a team of about 45 data scientists across various sites across the US and Europe who are working on a wide range of projects. So hiring and retaining and growing strong talent, pointing them in the right direction. How do we make sure they're focused on the highest priority opportunities, both for the product, but also for their growth and their career ambitions? And then largely the last point is to get out of their way, right? Nobody needs to be micromanaged or that kind of thing. So that is a big part of my job as well.
Great. So what does a typical day at work look like for you?
Gosh, that is a great question. So, I could probably pull up my calendar, which I'm a bit of a slave to anyway. And I'd say, one of my biggest challenges that I face is time management. How do I make the most of the finite amount of time I have? And so based on what I just kind of described as my job in terms of hiring and retaining great people, pointing them in the right direction, and then getting out of their way, I probably spend, let's call it, half of my time each week or each day on the people management side of things, having one-on-ones with the people that I support directly so that they can ask me questions. We can talk about their work, check in on projects as well as their personal development, or kind of like checking in with my teams overall. How is the full kind of like cross-functional team working towards their ambitions and their goals? The next chunk of work would be helping to point them all in the right direction. So how am I working with my other leaders as well as the people on my team to understand what should our roadmap look like? Like, what should we do next? What are the big questions to answer? What is happening with the data today in order to understand what we should dig into and all of those kind of things? As well as how do I unblock them? So someone might come to me and say, hey, I want to work on X. I think it's really important, but the problem is I can't because some process is broken or somebody doesn't agree with me. And then my job is to help them break through, either by coaching them on how to break through that challenge themselves, or by digging in to actually help to unblock them, to say, hey, let me fix this process on your behalf, or let me try to get buy-in with this other team to help move forward, or let me make sure you have the data you need to succeed. And then with whatever time I have left over, it's primarily digging in myself. I still am writing queries every day and trying to understand what the big questions are, as well as ensuring that I am taking care of myself and have the work-life balance I need, that I can keep showing up every day. Like the analogy I use is, you can't pour from an empty cup. So making sure that I'm taking the time to fill up my cup by spending time with my family, by riding my mountain bike, by seeing friends and family, whatever it may be, that then allows me to also be recharged and show up the next day and each day thereafter, to continue to kind of like do my best at work.
Great. And so what do you find most challenging and interesting about your work?
That is a great question. I would say, especially at Meta, one of the things, like when I have made decisions about which type of roles to pursue, which jobs to have, that's which companies to work for, and that kind of thing, I always think about it in terms of three criteria. One is the mission, the purpose. Like, am I going to come to work every day and work on something that matters to me, right? The next one is the people. Am I going to be surrounded by people that push me, that inspire me, that I can learn from, that I can help, and honestly, that I enjoy working with, and that it's fun? And then the last piece is that individual role. Is my role as a director of data science going to allow me to have the impact that I want to see on the business overall, as well as the kind of growth in my career? And so in this case, what gets me most excited about my current role here at Meta is the problem space is really important. All of us have felt it from the pandemic. I work on a product that we call Remote Presence, which is basically all of our real-time audio and video communication products as we build this kind of like bridge towards the metaverse, where we'll be able to have more immersive experiences together when we're apart. So we don't have to be on this grid on Zoom and that kind of thing. We might actually feel like we're sitting in the same room. No, we're not. And that's really important to me, because 62% of Americans report they feel lonely some or all of the time, right? And when the NIH kind of does studies on this, there are a variety of them, that they kind of find that loneliness or social isolation has the same health consequences as smoking like 15 cigarettes a day. This matters to the world, right? Like we need to solve this problem. And for better or for worse, much technology on the internet is not solving this problem. We're just kind of yelling at each other on the internet through a screen, right? And so how do we actually invert that and say, let's come together, let's have conversations like this, let's have face-to-face dialogue, let's be able to do activities together, root for our favorite sports team, watch a movie, take a yoga class, whatever it may be, such that we can feel together. And so working on that mission inspires me to wake up every day. And then what I love about data science, and why I keep coming back, is it's one of the most strategic functions in terms of helping us make the best decisions possible based on the data available. And it's just a series of really challenging puzzles, right? How do you understand, how do you take, like, I'll give you a sense of the magnitude of the data we have. On any given day, I might be trying to gather insights from multiple tables that each have several trillion rows. And so, like, how do we understand what that all means? What is signal versus noise? How do I know which needle to look for in that haystack, and which trends are worth exploring more versus not? Those sorts of puzzles are really rewarding for me and intellectually stimulating and challenging, as well as building teams and organizations and cultures that can go out and solve them. So how do you hire, like I can solve problems myself, but not at the same scale that a 45-person team that I support can. So how do I help them? How do I help find the right people who are interested in problems and passionate about this space and help one another, as well as build systems and culture such that they can all do their best work in that kind of organization overall?
Yeah, so I know you've touched on this a little bit, but what are the biggest challenges and opportunities shaping the focus of your work going forward into the future?
Um, so there are a variety. How long do you have, I guess, is the key. So I think that when I think about my work, and if I were just to boil it down to maybe the three most top of mind or largest challenges and opportunities, I would say the first one is true of technology overall, and that is the balance between gathering the data that we need to understand and improve the experience for billions of users. It's really helpful if I can granularly understand what my own experience was on Instagram yesterday, such that I can know where the problem was that I then need to go solve in order to make my experience better. The trade-off, of course, is privacy. Like, I'm not sure I want you to be able to know exactly what I did on Instagram yesterday, right? And so how do we respect users' privacy, right? And that would be capturing less data or capturing data in an anonymized way, while also capturing enough data such that we can understand and improve the product for you. We can build an algorithm that understands your interests and likes and all those kind of things in a way that makes a great experience for you. That's a really hard trade-off that the entire technology industry is working on, and data science is core to understanding those trade-offs, kind of building them overall. So that's certainly one of them. I think the next big trade-off that I spend a lot of time thinking about is like trends in the macro landscape overall. What does it mean? Like, the past 2 years have been very different from the 2 years before that, right? And so what part of these changes are here to stay versus not, in terms of use of things like video calling? What do people like about it versus what are people just like, they don't have a better alternative? And the moment they do have an alternative, it's going to go away. And how do we think about using that to shape where we're going? And then the last piece is the new technology that we're developing that will change the way in which we can all interact together when apart. So for example, how will VR headsets change the way that we can communicate? How will AR glasses, the ability to have a heads-up display on our faces at all time, change the way we interact? Those are kind of like more futuristic, right? But also, if we could each turn ourselves into 3D avatars, would we be more comfortable communicating if we didn't have to worry about, how we looked on a given day, or if we had a chance to, prep before the meeting and those kind of things? All of these kind of ideas, I think, are really changing the way that we need to think about how people can feel together when apart at a time when it really matters a lot. So those are the sorts of challenges that I'm thinking about, on top of the day-to-day stuff of like, should we do A or B? It's like, those are lots of fun decisions, but I have a great team that makes most of those decisions. So I'm kind of operating at a level slightly above that.
Jeb, this is all very interesting, and thank you for sharing these insights. I'm curious now about your own experience from campus to career. And so at Mid, you majored in economics. Tell us the rest of your story.
So yes, I did major in economics, but I minored in art history, and it was a toss-up which one was going to be a major versus a minor. And largely, I think, like, in retrospect, it was just like I was looking out at the world and saying, what types of puzzles am I interested in solving, and which one of these two degrees might better help me? Honestly, I enjoyed the classes around art history more than I enjoyed some of the economics related classes. And I much more enjoyed the diversity of things I got to do at Middlebury. I liked learning how to learn more so than I liked being an expert in any one topic. And so, yes, I ended up writing I ended up choosing to major in economics. Then I wrote a senior thesis, which was really transformative for me because it was the first time I had to fully manage my own process end to end. And I just had an open-ended question that I had to work on for a long time, kind of by myself, which largely reflects a working environment, much more so than like, here's homework to do on a given, right? And that taught me, I wrote my senior thesis about efficient markets, or how well general managers in the NBA trade draft picks. Like, are they able to value them appropriately and that kind of thing, which was another good indicator. Like, hey, I kind of like math and using math to solve these puzzles. But I also didn't know what I wanted to be when I grew up. And a lot of my friends were making the well-trodden path to New York, into investment banking. So that is what I did as well. I had taken 0 accounting classes. I had taken 0 corporate finance class. Like, I didn't know anything about finance other than that it was a very interesting space. We had just lived through the 2008 financial crisis. I had read a bunch of books about how interesting or how interrelated the markets were, how interesting it was to think about how, credit default swaps play into this like really kind of like wild web of finance. And so I did that. I was very fortunate to land at a privately owned bank where I worked in the commodities space for the next 5 years. There, again, I learned a lot about how to think through hard business. I was fortunate to work on something I was interested in, which was like, how do we get a coffee bean from Brazil into my cup in the morning? And how do we think about doing that really, really well? And as a bank, we were helping to finance traders who would buy the beans in Brazil and then kind of sell them to Starbucks and then that kind of thing, as well as structure their kind of like the financial profile of those companies, understand risks, think about who to lend to versus who to invest in, and all those kind of things. So I learned a ton about how businesses work. I learned a ton about how to use math to reduce uncertainty, right? To say, hey, I don't know what's going to happen in a year, but how bad is it if A happens, or how bad is it if B happens? And how likely are either of those two things to happen, such that I can start to kind of understand where I should think about investing and why. And I was surrounded by a group of people who pushed me really hard. I worked very, very hard during that time, who helped me grow, who gave me lots of great opportunities. And ultimately, I figured out I didn't want to be an investment banker when I grew up, which was great. That was like a very important learning, and it doesn't take anything away from how valuable that experience was for me, because all the things I learned were applicable to the next thing that I did. So as I was leaving banking, I was thinking, okay, I'll stay in finance, but I'll go into a different part. And I was saying, hey, why don't I explore venture capital? I like technology and I like finance. That seems to be the intersection. I was interviewing at a series of venture capital firms and was researching their portfolio companies. And there was this company that I had been using for a while, called Uber, but was, if you can believe it at the time, UberX didn't exist at this time. It was only black cars. It was very, very expensive. And Uber was probably only in 10 cities in the US. So I was researching, I happened to land on their website and they were like, hey, we're hiring. And I was like, okay, like, I guess that's interesting. And so I was actually hired to be a launcher at the time. So what that meant is fly to a given city, recruit drivers to join the platform, help recruit riders, and then manage the marketplace and the kind of like the P&L of that location. And then once it gets to a steady state, hand that off to somebody else and go launch the next city. So I did that for about a year. And the rest of my time at Uber, I was very fortunate. It was growing so fast. So I joined Uber when it was about a 500 employee company. And by the time I left, there were about 35,000 employees. And I basically had a different job every 9 to 12 months, depending on what the biggest problem was at the company. And so that's like, if I had one piece of, maybe not, I don't know if it's career advice, but one thing that has been true in my career is working on a mission that I believe in, right? That I'm inspired by, surrounded by people, and in a role that I can learn from and love working with, and in a role where I can make an impact. Those are the three ingredients that I'm chasing. And so I loved Uber's idea of helping to create earnings opportunities for those who are the most left behind, and often we're left with no options to earn, as well as helping people get home safely from bars and think about how to increase mobility in kind of cities overall. So that was really important. And then I found this group of people that I was just totally blown away with. I was fortunate to report to the same one or two people over the next 7 years, more or less, for that whole time. And then my role was just, what is the biggest problem? So I went from launching those cities to being kind of after about a year and change, to being about the operations manager of a series of markets for the next, let's call it 6 or 9, 12 months. And then while I was there, I started doing analysis on those markets I was looking after to understand, hey, why are riders and drivers leaving the platform? Well, at the time, it turns out our customer support was not very good. I don't know if any of you can relate to this, but you'd say, hey, my driver went way out of the way. Can I have a refund? And someone would just say no. And you'd be like, that's not a good answer. So I showed this analysis, and it got bubbled up, and the COO at the time said, great, congratulations, you and 3 other people are now going to help us solve customer support. And I didn't, that wasn't something I sought after. Being a part of a customer support organization was not part of my career plan. It wasn't something that I expected to do long term, but it was a massive problem. It needed to be solved, and I was available and had the skills to help do it. And so I just said yes. And in doing that, I met a bunch of new people who became incredible mentors and showed me how to think through hard problems, how to fix things. I learned a lot about process. How do you, at Uber's scale, we get 1 million customer support inbounds on a given day. How do you route them to how do you know who should answer each one or what type of problem it is? And especially when they're very different. It's like me just complaining that a car didn't smell very good is very different from saying, hey, I was unfortunately an offender bender, right? That's a very potentially serious thing. We need to treat those 2 types of customer support interactions very differently. How do we make sure we're set up to identify them quickly and kind of process them really well? And over the course of the next about 12 months, me and those 3 other people had to present to the CEO every week about our progress. And it was very stressful. We learned a ton. We made so much progress, and then ultimately hired in a bunch of people who replaced us and were better at leading customer support organizations than we were. And now continue to lead that organization now 5, 6, 7 years later, and do so really well. But they no longer needed the kind of triage team or the EMTs, if you will, to turn around. So I rolled off of that. And at the time, then the next biggest problem was driver satisfaction was declining, right? And so we said, okay, great. We got to come up with how do we rethink our driver strategy to maximize the value we're creating for drivers, and then in turn increase the efficiency of the marketplace, be more reliable for riders, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so I helped to lead our global driver strategy for the next year or so. And then, of course, I met new mentors. In fact, there was a gentleman who was leading the product management function at that time, who totally changed the way that I think. Right, the way he broke down problems was something I'd never seen before. And so understanding wow, okay, this is how you think about a very large problem, driver sentiment, and break it all the way down into something that several thousand people can work on at the same time, right? In a way that's cohesive and driving real progress. And just was really grateful for that experience. And driver sentiment went up. We made a lot of progress. And again, they said, Jeb, we don't really need you anymore. And so then my last stint was Bird and Lime, the scooter companies, if you're familiar with them, kind of popped up out of nowhere. They went from being unheard of things to being billion-dollar companies, more or less overnight. And a bunch of us within Uber were saying, hey, we're supposed to be the innovators within transportation. How did we miss this trend? What should we be doing about it? And so the company decided to create a division specifically for these new and emerging transportation bets. And that woman that I had worked for a very long time was asked to lead that organization. And she said, hey, I don't know what your job's going to be, but you want to come work for me on this problem? And I said, sure. And so I joined on kind of day one of that organization. Then over the next several years, ended up leading the strategy teams for that organization, then strategy and data science, then strategy and data science and warehouse operations, how do you repair bicycles at scale, and then also added the hardware and software product management function. So responsible for defining what type of bicycle we should build or what type of software we should build. And that was wonderful, but then COVID hit. I really believed in that mission, right? Taking cars off the road was something I became really passionate about. I love bikes. And I learned a ton about how to lead organizations and be a leader in an area that I wasn't an expert. I am not trained in hardware, right? So how do you think about supporting an organization where you are not you don't have the most experience on that function in the room, and how can you help to support those people was really interesting. But Uber had to make hard calls during COVID because transportation obviously declined materially. So I helped to sell some of those businesses. I helped to wind down other ones and that sort of thing. And ultimately was ready for my next adventure at that point, which is when I had been kind of talking off and on with Meta. This whole idea of remote presence was just coming into focus. He said, "Hey, do you want to come do data science for us?" And I was looking at product management jobs, I was looking at startups, I was looking at big companies, and just kind of found, again, a mission I really believed in, a group of people in the interview process that I was like, wow, these are like really impressive people, and a role where I was like, it's very obvious that we can improve this experience and that data could be really helpful in making that transition. So that, yeah, I guess is what led me on that journey.
Yes, thank you for sharing. And what role, if any, do advanced degrees or technical certifications play in this space?
Um, I I think there are two. If you, it's a good question, and I'm not going to give you a hard and fast answer. What I'm going to give you is the spectrum a little bit. So I think for many technical functions, having a technical background is really important, right? If you want to, we had a team building batteries for our electric bikes. Like, you need to be pretty well trained in that discipline in order to do that, and do it safely and well. For a lot of other functions like data science, there wasn't even a data science degree when I was going through school, right? So in my experience, if you want to explore a new function that you're not yet in that discipline, the two ways to do it are to do really well in your current job, and then put your hand up when there's an opportunity to take on kind of new opportunities in that next function, which is largely how I was fortunate to make that progress. It was like random series of events that led me from launching to customer support to data science, right? Or for others who are saying, hey, I'm ready to change it up. Those degrees, or going back to a boot camp or a technical certification, can help you say, I used to do this, I'm very good at this, and here are the skills I bring from that. And I now have the technical skills to do this other thing that I can combine with the other. I'm ready for my next role, and then think about how to kind of position yourself for that.
Thank you, Jeb, for sharing your experiences. So, given these experiences and what you know now, what advice can you give to current mid students about how to best prepare themselves for entry points into this career field?
Yeah. I will first acknowledge that, like, I my career, or I am fortunate that I can approach my career from a place of privilege. I'm a white male in the United States. Like, the deck is stacked in my favor. So just saying, like, here's Jeb's experience is is not entirely true for everyone, but I'll share kind of like what my experience has been, and what I think we can all learn from that, while also holding space for the fact that, like, the our system does not yet have an equal playing field for all of us as we approach these things. The pieces of advice that I would give is network, right? So my experience has been, the Middlebury alumni network has been, and then the Uber alumni network after it, has been the most important way that I have discovered what types of jobs are out there, and gotten my foot into the door to even begin having conversations where it might be interesting. That's how I got my first job in banking. I ended up connecting with people at Uber that way, and those sorts of things. And that's why for me, it's so important to give back in circumstances like this, because I simply wouldn't have had the career I've had without the support that I got from the Middlebury alumni network, and people being willing to pick up the phone when I called, and that kind of thing. The next piece of advice that I would give is choosing your job is much less important than making the most of whatever job you choose, right? And so, like, I chose investment banking to start. In retrospect, I do not want to be an investment banker, but I put all of my time and energy into being a great investment banker and exploring all of those kind of, like, maximizing that experience. And what that enabled me to do was two things. One, I developed a bunch of advocates through that process. People that I worked with were like, hey, Jeb isn't a bozo, and he's, like, not that bad to work with. And so, like, I'm willing to introduce him to other people, or, like, provide referrals, or help him explore other opportunities. And also, I learned a ton about how to create value and how to be valuable in kind of a business setting. How do I use math to reduce uncertainty? How do we think about risk? How do we think about growth? How can we think about identifying kind of like customer problems that we can go solve for them so we can be most helpful, and those sorts of things, which were then wildly applicable in future aspects of my career. And then I think that the last piece, and also, by the way, all of this advice is largely just me parroting back what I've been fortunate to hear from other mentors along the way. The last piece is like, typically no one career step is forever. Nor is it going to get you everything that you want in your next. So I think about them as like chapters in a journey, right? So my like I want to, be leading kind of like large, or I'm very interested in technology and using technology to solve problems. I like leading people and I want to solve hard problems. So like being the chief technology officer of a company might be something I'm interested in over a long period of time. But like I can't just like put my hand up and say I'd like to be the CTO of Meta, right? Like that's not a thing that's available to me. So how do I think about, okay, I'll develop data science skills now, and then think about what's the next set of skills I need on the journey that I can get in my next role, and then my next role. And then by the time you take 2, 3, or 4 steps over 3, 5, whatever years, you're then closer to that journey. And maybe you're going to pivot along there and say, hey, wow, this experience actually taught me I really like hardware more than software, or I really like climate. I'm really passionate about climate. Like any hour I dedicate that's not focused on climate is not something that matters to me, right? And like learning, my experience has been, I can only learn by doing. And so being open to the idea of chapters and making the most of each one, I think is really valuable as well.
Mm-hmm. So what skill sets do you see as most important to have when pursuing a career in this field?
I think the most important skill the skill that I use most frequently is the ability to problem solve, right? And that is largely about being able to identify problems in a variety of contexts and then break them down into areas that I can solve. And that to me has been about, for lack of a better cliche, like learning to learn, which is what I think the liberal arts degree does the best. It's like, I don't know, like, was it super important that I learned about like shaker furniture? No, but like, the fact that I learned how to do some calculus and, some macro econ and learned about furniture and Spanish and whatever, all in between, meant that I learned how to identify what matters, break it down, and then communicate really well what I found, ask for help where I need it, and that kind of thing. That's been the most valuable skill, largely because I like to be a generalist more so than I like to be a specialist. Beyond that skill, right? Because I also think like I didn't even know what SQL was when I was at Middlebury, let alone that this was going to be an important skill that I needed to have later. And like it's now something I use every day, right? But like if you learn how to learn, you can teach yourself those things over time as you understand which one of them is important and which one's not. From a like tactical, technical perspective, for someone who's like, hey, I would like to get into a big technology company like Meta, and I would like to be in a data science like function, the types of skills that I would think about are, can you access the data? That's largely about SQL, right? That's kind of the language that we use most commonly to access our relational databases and then extract data from it. And then can you derive insights from data, right? Saying, hey, this trend indicates this, and here's what we should do about it, right? Or when some users experience a green button, they're more likely to click on it than when they experience a red button. Okay, great. So we should always use green buttons. And like, how do we think about those sorts of things? That's kind of the next set of skills. And then just showing up and being curious and being optimistic and like putting in hard work while also making sure you're able to take care of yourselves. Like that kind of, those are the types of ingredients that I'm looking for as someone who's looking to enter, when we hire people straight out of college into data science roles. Those are the types of skills that I'm looking for, because I don't expect you to know how to run an experiment within Meta because you've never possibly done that before. But I know how to teach you that. So if you're curious and you know how to learn and you think critically about things and you're optimistic and hardworking, I can teach you how to run an experiment with Meta. I can teach you how to write SQL. I can teach you how to do all those kind of things.
Jeb, thank you once again for your engagement with us and helping students to prepare for their first career destinations. This concludes this episode within the series Exploring Careers in Data Analytics. In closing, I want to encourage viewers to tune in to get career perspectives and advice from a number of professionals in a broad variety of organizations and our other episodes in this series. I also want to encourage you to tune in to the other MIDDVantage series, which can be accessed through the Events and Programs tab on the CCI website. Thank you again for watching.
Thanks for having me.